Welcome back to Morning Joe. It is 23 past the hour. We are now less than a month from the Iowa caucuses. And joining us now from Des Moines is Republican presidential candidate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Good to have you with us this morning.
Governor, thank you so much for being with us. We got some polls over the past weekend. Despite what we've been hearing from the Trump campaign and others, this race may not be over quite yet. Nikki's moving in New Hampshire. You're in second place in Iowa right now. What's your pathway to victory in Iowa?
Well, first, Joe, just let me say there's a lot of disappointed college football fans in North Florida because your Alabama Crimson Tide leapfrog the undefeated Florida State Seminoles to get into the college playoff. You know, we haven't had the love in college football in Florida for a long time as a state. You all go almost every year. So I had to tell my young kids who are all Florida State fans why they went undefeated and did not make the playoff. And I haven't given them a convincing answer yet. So we'll see how it goes going forward there. Look, here in Iowa, this is all about showing up and lining up people to caucus for you. So we've been to all 99 counties. We get people to sign the cards to say they're going to come. We're going to have the biggest organization and support going into a caucus that anyone can remember. That ultimately is what does it. I also think people here in Iowa and in New Hampshire, they expect you to come and answer their questions. They expect you to come and ask for their vote. And I think what Donald Trump will do, he'll parachute in for 45 minutes, an hour, give a speech, and then just leave. We've actually listened to folks, answered their questions, and taken in a lot of their advice about what they want to see about the country. So I think you're going to see that on caucus night. And historically, you know, these polls in the caucus are tough because it's tough to identify who's actually going to go there for 3 hours and caucus, and also what happens in the caucus sites, because people give speeches about the candidates. Different people may change. We've got the best organization for that. All the counties and precincts organized, and so we're excited about what we've been able to do. We have the governor Kim Reynolds' endorsement. We got endorsed by Bob Vanderplatz from the Family Leader. You know, those are really good indications. And I will say this: the people on the ground here, you know, they kind of will just shake their head at some of the polls because, you know, they know the areas where there was rabid Trump support, say in 2016 and 2020, and they say that things have changed on the ground. And I think that's true for both Iowa and New Hampshire.
Well, it's certainly what Bob Vanderplatz and other evangelical leaders have said. Is some are just saying flat out they don't think the polls are going to reflect the outcome. But even if you do end up winning in Iowa, will Donald Trump admit it? He didn't admit it when Ted Cruz beat him in 2016.
No, of course not. Yeah, no, that's baked in the cake. We win Iowa, and then he'll say something, but people aren't going to buy that, especially here in Iowa. They take pride in having the first caucus. Same thing with New Hampshire with first in the nation primary. So we'll do it. But ultimately, the great thing about the way this is done with the smaller constituencies going first is that once people start voting, that changes all the punditry. It changes everything. I mean, clearly there's been a concerted effort to say that Trump is, you know, why even bother having people vote? That is not the way people feel on the ground here in Iowa. Once that starts happening, I think there's a lot of clarity. And, you know, people have said from the beginning about how there were so many candidates running, but the field has narrowed already before Iowa. And I think you're going to continue to see that after we get through these first few primaries.
Governor DeSantis, good morning. It's Jonathan Lemire. I wanted to talk about a crisis you may inherit if you become commander-in-chief, and that's the situation in Israel and their war against Hamas. Your campaign has made it clear, saying that you have the clearest, most consistent pro-Israel policy in the race. But I wanted to ask you as to your assessment of Israel's military tactics with the number of civilian casualties, including children, growing exponentially, seemingly by the week, with a lot of outside groups warning about what Israel is doing, and the Biden administration doing the same. Do you feel like Israel is conducting this war appropriately?
I think Israel takes great strides to minimize collateral damage. And I think of any military force in the world, they probably do that more than anyone because they have such a microscope internationally coming down on them. When these attacks happened on October 7th, I said we stand with Israel, and everyone was saying that. But I was like, as we get in weeks and months of this, a lot of the scrutiny is going to be on Israel. I think that they do take great pains to focus on the Hamas terrorists. But at the end of the day, Hamas is what's put us in this situation. And I'd like to see more people internationally calling on Hamas to unconditionally surrender and to release the hostages. It seems like most of the opposition is directed at Israel, but they're in a situation where they have a terrorist group on their border that wants to annihilate their entire country and drive every Jew into the sea. So for them to kind of do half measures and not ultimately solve the problem, I don't think that that's an option for them right now.
So, Governor, the Israel funding for Israel, of course, here in the United States is being linked to this border security package, Israel-Ukraine, for border security money, and that deal is being negotiated in the Senate. What is your view of that? Would you approve of that measure? And where do you make of the border security negotiations that have been discussed at this point?
Well, I can tell you this. When I'm around in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina, for that matter, one of the most frequent questions I get is, why is it that they're sending money overseas when they're not willing to take care of problems at home, such as our border? And it is a national security issue, and I think the Republicans should absolutely not. And it's not just money. It's really changing the law and changing the policy so things like parole can't be abused. But there's no question that border, our open border, has made us more vulnerable. I think they need to put their foot down. What they shouldn't do, though, is negotiate some type of deal where there's a mirage of border security and it turns out nothing changes. That's just Lucy with the football, Charlie Brown whiffing again. And Republican voters, I think, would be very, very upset if there's some type of phony deal that doesn't actually get the job done at the border.
Governor, there's a lot of concern about this presidential election in terms of concerns about our democracy as we know it. The Atlantic devoted an entire issue to the threat of a second Trump term. So my question to you is, do you think Donald Trump is a threat to democracy?
No, look, I think Donald Trump, when he was president, I think that he really didn't take some of the action that he could have constitutionally taken. And so I understand there's a narrative saying he's going to be much different this next term. But I look back, what didn't he do? He didn't move forcefully to build the border wall. That languished for years. He didn't fire people like Anthony Fauci from the COVID task force when many conservatives, including me in Florida, were saying they needed to go a different direction. He even gave Fauci an award his last day in office. A lot of the people he appointed, he's since trashed after leaving office, but he could have fired them. He didn't really take any action to reform the bureaucracy or to curb the administrative state. So I think what is being said would be him acting in ways that actually were not how he acted before. He deferred a lot of his presidency to some of these people that he now criticizes.
Right. And with respect, even just over the weekend, he was talking about the January 6th insurrectionists, those who were tried and convicted as hostages. And he was talking about dictators around the world and how much he loves them and he's such good friends with them. You don't have any concern about the comments that he's making?
Well, it's interesting on the January 6th protests. I mean, he called that rally knowing that was going to be in D.C. where things could get potentially out of hand. And he's now saying he would do clemency for the nonviolent. But he could have done that when he was president. He could have said, look, he could have taken responsibility. He could have said that the people that went, not the violent people, obviously that's a different, it's a bird of a different feather. But on the people that were there just as protesters and kind of got caught up in it, he could have granted clemency to them, and he chose not to because I think he was told that if he did that, he could potentially risk being convicted at his Senate impeachment trial. So the idea that now he's going to help people that were railroaded, he could have done that before he left office.
Do you think there were people that were railroaded that took part in the January 6th riots?
I think there were people, Joe, that came because he said to protest the election. I don't think that they intended to do it. Some of the people that were convicted of things like trespassing, you see videos where you'll have police officers actually motioning for people to go in. You'll see that where they were just taking pictures in Statuary Hall. And so the issue with that is that obviously they would not have been there but for the Trump rally. And those were his people. And so the question is, somebody that was there, nonviolent, probably didn't have intent to do anything when they showed up that day, he could have done things to potentially alleviate burdens on them, and he didn't do it. Now he says he's going to do it, but he didn't when he was president.
Well, and you're, of course, separating nonviolent from violent. He's
of course, yeah, absolutely.
With a much broader brush. Say even people that beat the hell out of cops with American flags, he's praising. Let me ask you something. You're younger than I am. And I'm not exactly sure when you became a Republican or why you became a Republican. But Ronald Reagan was my inspiration. And a big part of it is our family. We were cold warriors from way back. That's why I'm confused when I hear Donald Trump praising communist dictators across the world. And I know you, like most Republican candidates, you don't want to have to answer for Donald Trump all the time. I get that. You want to talk about yourself. I am confused, though, and I'm hoping that you may be able to help me out here, and I'll help you out on why Alabama's going to the playoffs, but you help me out on this one. When he's praising the leader of communist China, when he praises Kim Jong-un, this one of the most tyrannical communists on the globe, when he praises Vladimir Putin and says, hey, Putin said that America's rotten, all of this other stuff. I don't have to say that if Ronald Reagan heard it, he'd be rolling over in his grave, because you and I both know he would. Can you give me any insight from what you know about Donald Trump, why he seems to always praise these communist thugs?
Well, the thing about, and you point out with Xi, he ran in 2016 with a very strong policy against China. He had talked about China ripping us off. He had talked about China getting away with building up military, and that was really a key thing. And yet, when it came time to be president, he didn't take the forceful action that he did. In fact, when COVID hit, which was really the time I think he could have marshaled a lot of support in America to have a stronger posture vis-a-vis China, he was praising Xi about how well Xi did with the virus early on. But you and I both know China covered up what was going on. They weren't helpful. They helped create a huge problem.
Governor, not only that, not only did he praise him, he said, on behalf of the American people, we thank President Xi and China for their openness. When you had people in his own administration like Matthew Pottinger desperately trying to get information out of China because he knew they were lying to him.
Yeah, and I think that part of what also was motivating was, he wanted the trade deal so that, he had done the phase one. That obviously has since broken down. But he really wanted the phase two. And so I think it was, striking a deal above all else. But the reality was we were in a situation there where we absolutely should have taken more forceful action. And no one's ever done anything to hold China accountable for their role in that. Didn't do very much either to hold China accountable for their role in the fentanyl. So there is a difference in the rhetoric of the 2016 campaign vis-a-vis China and then how he actually dealt with Xi Jinping. And he does frequently say that it's really impressive that Xi is able to rule over 1 billion people with an iron fist, I think he says.
Governor Elise Jordan here. You said something the other day in your CNN Town Forum that I agree with, that Donald Trump put us on the path to these inflationary times. How would your economic policy differ from Donald Trump? And would you extend the Trump tax cuts?
Well, I also just would point out, I think the first 3 years, I think the economy was largely good under Donald Trump. I think his regulatory policy was good. I think his energy policy was good. I think his tax policy was largely good, too. Clearly, I wouldn't want to see individual tax rates go up, and so we would want to extend those. But, you know, there's kind of a narrative that's developed in conservative media that somehow, like, the all 4 years were so great. 2020 was a bad year for this country. And it started in March of 2020 with how they responded to COVID. He was criticizing nations like Sweden, who took a more modest approach, kept everything going, reduced the panic. In reality, that is the approach he should have taken here. And so that COVID panic really led to not just the $2 trillion in the CARES Act, but then the $2.2 trillion in December of 2020. We never spent that much money. And people were saying at the time that somehow there wasn't going to be impacts and you didn't see inflation right away. But you don't get inflation for 18 to 20, 24 months after you see those types of events. So I think it was a combination of both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, obviously the Trump administration, and then Biden came in and did another $1.9 trillion in March of 2023. But the government induced the rising prices. That's just a fact, and both parties have their fingerprints on it. And we got to start spending money more in line with sustainability. We should not have locked in the levels of spending that we have since COVID. I don't think it's sustainable, and we've obviously added debt at a record number.
Governor, and to that point, plenty of conservatives supported adding to that debt at the time, much to, if you're a fiscal conservative like I am, you don't like that increase in spending. And so how would you have approached a bailout, and how would you approach spending? Because every Republican who seems to get in power, they still spend away.
So it's interesting. We had in Iowa, we had Congressman Tom Massey from Kentucky came up and did an event with me, and he told the story. You know, he objected to the CARES Act, $2 trillion being voice voted without Congress actually being present. He took a lot of heat for that because he said, look, we've got to be on the record here. Everyone else is doing their job. You got to do it. And he predicted a lot of the inflation. And he tells the story. I was the only elected official that called him and told him, you know what? I think you're right on this. I think you're going to take a lot of heat. But I think a year or two down the line, people are going to look back and say, you know, those were mistakes. And so how do you do it? I think you presidential leadership, if you look back historically, we've had probably in the last 40 years, 2 times, maybe 3 times where Republicans actually pushed against spending. President Reagan did push against domestic spending, wasn't necessarily successful in getting it where it needed to be, but he would veto bills from Congress. They would override them sometimes. Then the 94 Congress came in and actually pushed Clinton to a balanced budget. And then you did have the Tea Party class force some changes when Obama was there. But those are really the only 3 times. I think every other time Republicans have been in, they haven't spent much different than Democrats have.
Well, it's been a nightmare, actually. You're right. I mean, we balanced the budget 4 years in a row in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then when Bush was president and Republicans were in Congress, the deficit doubled, kept going up under Barack Obama, and under Donald Trump. Even the first 3 years, they're record-breaking deficits, debt, budgets. I mean, just out of control spending. Would things be any different if you were president? Would you be the first?
Yeah, they would. I mean, I think Donald Trump.
If you're a Republican president, will you be the first Republican president this century that doesn't double the debt?
Yeah, we will, because we'll lean in. We'll use the veto pen. We'll exercise leadership and get people on the same page. But I do think that if you look back, I mean, I remember President Trump, telling me, look, no one's ever lost an election because of the deficit or spending too much money. And that actually may be true, but I think that's not where we have a luxury of being at this point. And just the sheer amount of increase in the debt. I mean, you turn to the 21st century, our debt was $5 trillion, $6 trillion, and now here we are, not less than a quarter century later, and we're at $33 trillion. So this has been a unique failure, I think, in just the last 25 years.
Yeah, it was 5.6 trillion, turn of the century. doubled to 11 trillion when Bush got out of office, it went to 19 trillion when Obama was out of office, and Trump took it from 19 to over 30.
Republican presidential candidate Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, thank you very much. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.